So, I want to introduce our next speaker. You already met him in the morning. His name is Gary Christian, coming over from Australia. He's
Come on.
from down south. I think of down under, I think
That's it.
So he's a prevention researcher and he's the vice chair and head of OVUM Scientific Committee. He's also the president of Drug Free Australia, and he's going to talk about the drug-related deaths in Australia. His analysis of two separate drug policy errors, the impact of harm reduction versus drug prevention, and strategy to reduce drug-related deaths. So give a warm welcome to Gary.
All right. Make sure that we've got the right slide up here. So I've called it harm reduction and drug-related mortality, and that's what we're going to look at specifically today. It's Australia's failure, and you'll see why when you look at the stats. So there are two approaches, of course. There's drug prevention, rehab model, interdiction involved with that. But also there is the harm reduction approach, and if you look at the screen there, you'll see down here that it says that rather than preventing drug use, harm reduction focuses on people who continue to use drugs, and that's the emphasis, continue to use drugs. And so you notice the subtle move of the shiny toy over here, which is harm done to the drug user themselves, away from all of the harm that they are doing to everybody around them. So that's how they misdirect, I think is the word. That's how they misdirect you to say that drugs harm only the user, and that's where we must put our money as governments. Now, within Australia, we have something which is very valuable to us. Every 3 years, we have an extensive survey which is done. And that survey asks people, amongst many, many other questions, it's called the Household Survey, 25,000 Australians every 3 years. It does ask them whether they approve of certain drugs being used in their community. Do you approve or disapprove of these drugs? And what you'll see is within Australia, is that we've got about 1 in every 4 Australians quite happy to see cannabis used. But when it comes to the other drugs, it is hardly any Australians who have any interest in approving those drugs. And so ecstasy, around the 5% mark. Ice, speed, 1.5% approve of it. When it comes to cocaine, about 3%. And when it comes to heroin, about 1%. So we have used that survey effectively for 20 years to keep our politicians on notice. And we have kept on sending them to them the results of that survey, which hardly ever changes. It's over 20 years that we've used it. Those results are pretty much the same. Cannabis, a little bit of movement. But that is to keep them on notice that we are watching them as to whether they are in step with Australian attitudes, which obviously want less drugs, not more drugs. Okay? If they wanted more drugs, they'd approve of them. But it's less drugs as well. And that's our argument that we have used extensively. Now, we have a document, and you can access this off our website, drugfree.org.au. And it covers everything. There's a lot more information. It's a 63-page document, small type. So there's a lot of stats in there, and that all addresses issues that we're just touching on a little bit today. So, harm reduction. Australia was the first country in the world to introduce harm reduction as an official federal national policy, drug policy. We were the first, and we have our people boast about it, the ones that introduced it back at that time. And of course, they called it something different. They called it harm minimisation because they wanted to rope in prevention and interdiction, all of these other things into one all-encompassing title, harm minimisation. But harm reduction was the new novel approach that they took. And the reality that we saw within Australia was this, that within the first 13 years, by 1998, and these are the, go back there, these are the official figures here, that's the document I'm taking it from, and we saw amphetamine use increase in 13 years after harm reduction was introduced by 500%, cannabis by 300%, cocaine 400%, ecstasy 750%, and heroin by 300%. Now these are massive increases, and this is what you see under harm reduction. So by 1998, again, now this is a report from the United Nations, and it's their 2002 report. The thing about the United Nations reports is that they always lag well behind, and so the stats of here mostly came from 1998 to 1999. Australia led the world. Here it is. That's an aggregate of 5 different kinds of drugs, an aggregate average of 5 different drugs. And New Zealand not too far behind. The reason New Zealand's not too far behind is it adopted harm reduction 2 years after we did. So it took us as Australia's example and made it their official policy as well. And here we are, well above the US. Everybody thought the US was the worst in the world, but we are light years ahead of them. Now, what happened with drug deaths? What actually happened on that front? Well, this is what you see. The first stats that we have on drug deaths happen to be 1988, so a little bit after 85. We don't have an 85 figure exactly. But here is what happened. We actually had a bit of a reduction, and then we had exponential increases until by 1999 we had 1,116 deaths within our country, which for Australia was a lot for a population of about 20 million people. And at that time, we actually saw the media start to create a hue and cry and say the government has got to do something about this. And just at that time, 1999, around that time, 1998 was the date that the government had seen the rise in drug use. We had a Conservative government, and they said we're going to do something about it. So they created an approach which was called tough on drugs. They used the word zero tolerance. It wasn't zero tolerance at all, but it did put in place some effective preventions. So I can remember that every parent within Australia got a booklet in their mailbox which was addressing how to talk to your kids about drugs. It was actually quite effective. And what they also did was they quadrupled the budget, and they put a lot of money into rehab, a lot of it. So rehab was readily available to anybody who wanted to get off drugs. And what you see is because of that particular approach that they took, prevention and rehabilitation, interdiction, this is what you saw, the deaths. These are the deaths from heroin, that's the black line there, okay? By 2007, after 9 years of that policy, our drug deaths were down 67%. Now, was it a slow progress towards that? No, it was an immediate drop down to about 360 deaths per year, and that's where it stayed at around 360, 350, and that's population adjusted. The population was increasing, and so it looks like it's going down, but that's your heroin deaths within Australia. And what an incredible success that was. Now, in 2007, we had a new government come in, and they said, oh, we're going to scrap tough on drugs. It's all over. And so we went back to harm reduction taking the priority. All right, so you go back to that slide there, and what you see is a quadrupling of drug deaths over that period. We had harm reduction ascendant within Australia, where not much emphasis was put on prevention or rehab. When you had the government come back, and in this time period here, 2007, that decade there, what you see is drug use goes up dramatically again, because there's no longer the emphasis on prevention and rehab. Harm reduction is the main philosophy, and everything that entails and everything that speaks to the population, because there is a messaging that goes with harm reduction, and that is that drug use is thoroughly acceptable. So this is what we see with the other drugs. And you've got amphetamines, you've got amphetamines, antidepressants. These are all illegals other than alcohol, which is in there somewhere. But all the other ones are illicit drugs or illicitly used drugs. And you see them skyrocketing, all of them going up, and by very big percentages. Anywhere between 210% and 590%. So that is major increases that we're talking about. And there we go, there they are. We've actually got them spelled out, and you can actually see just incredible increases. Now, what you've got to remember is that when a person dies of a drug overdose, they often have 2 or 3 substances in their system at the same time. Very few people in Australia, and this is true worldwide, die of just heroin or just opiates. It is usually opiates which are used with benzodiazepines. It's the mix of the things which create the death. And so deaths within Australia, you'll see cannabis in here. Cannabis will have been a factor, but mainly most of the deaths will be opiate deaths, most of them. So what we see and what we get from that picture, and in this era here, harm reduction is ascended again and drug use is going up markedly enough to create that many deaths. That's the death stats. That's how many people are dying within Australia. So mortality is just going up through the roof. What we have to take from that is that harm reduction has been correlated with a lot of mortality within Australia. It correlates with it. Now people say correlation is not causation. Okay, so harm reduction may not be causing that. And what we would say to anybody that says that is, you tell us what other confounders there might be in the system. Notice, and this is really important, notice that when prevention came in, the use of all the drugs went down along with their deaths. That's the death stats. Through that period when we've got prevention as a priority, they're all low. But as soon as harm reduction comes back in, they all go up. See if you can find some confounders. Some people would say, oh, well, you know, we changed our definition of deaths. Well, there was no change of definition. You can't find anything like that. Everything suggests that harm reduction is the cause within Australia. Now, we then have to look at what is the mechanism by which harm reduction is creating more deaths. And so let's have a look at this one as an example. What is the mechanism to create more deaths? So, pill testing. We've had since, I would say about 2015, a heavy push for pill testing within Australia. For drug checking in Europe, I think.
They changed the language.
Yeah, they changed the language. And went a little bit broader with what they were, checking out. But they said, we want pill testing. And when Drug Free Australia said, no, you don't want pill testing, because here's some stats that you need to know. And we gave these to our politicians. In 2020, there was a study that built on another study that had been done in 2011, which we first used early in the piece. But the 2020 study was much more comprehensive. And it took all the coroner reports in Australia between 2000 and 2018. Every report, coroner report that mentioned MDMA or ecstasy in it as a cause of the death. And they analysed those 392 deaths over those 18-year periods. And this is what they found. They said, all right, 14% of those deaths were from just an allergic reaction to MDMA. All right, there was no other drug involved that just could not metabolise the substance, and they died from MDMA. 48% were from co-using MDMA or ecstasy with alcohol or benzos or with cocaine, whatever. Another 29% were from accidents, mostly vehicle accidents, while they were intoxicated with ecstasy in the system. And here was the rationale that they were giving for pill testing to politicians. They said the reason we need pill testing is because there are adulterant other drugs in the pill which are killing all of these people. Now, was that true or not? The science, this was a comprehensive science. It covered all of this during those years in Australia, comprehensive. And only three of those were bad batch pills. And so they had gone to politicians with a lie, telling them that people were dying from adulterants when they weren't. They were dying from all other causes, which pill testing as an intervention at music festivals couldn't do a thing about. They couldn't do anything about allergic-like reactions. You can't test for that. You couldn't do anything about co-using it with alcohol. So I went through and got the pill tested and say don't use it with alcohol, but you can do that with a flashing sign on the stage of the music festival. So you don't need somebody checking pills to tell you that. And then 29% who are dying from accidents. Well, how is pill testing going to help you identify a person who's accident prone? It's not. It's not going to happen. And so what we've seen within Australia is that there has been a lot of dishonesty. Media has been fully on board because they're basically funded, I think, by USA, which just got cut, fortunately. 8,000 journalists in the world funded by USA, all for the left, pushing these kind of mistruths. And when it came to the pill testers themselves, we had an outfit called Pill Testing Australia, and this is what they did. They said, come into our tent, and this was in 2019. They did a pill testing trial in Canberra, our national capital. They said, come into our tent, get your pill tested. If we find that ecstasy is the only thing in that pill, we're going to give it a white card. If we find some other drug like an ethyl pentanone in the pill, we're going to give it a red card. And you don't want to take that because the red card says that it causes, this is a substance which causes increased harm, multiple overdoses and deaths. And so here we have, when you look at the science which we just looked at, pill testing doesn't address the real causes of all of those deaths, but they're giving a white card to the very substance which is killing most people in Australia. It's the ecstasy which is killing them. Whether it's intoxication or car accident, it's still the ecstasy. All right, and that's the point. So you can see why harm reduction is increasing deaths within Australia. It's, they're putting across a message which is entirely false. People are thinking, oh, ecstasy's okay. I got my pill tested, it's not going to kill me, and yet all of those other courses said that it might kill them. And it is a cause of death. Ecstasy is the cause of the death. And that's the kind of lies that you get, unfortunately. Now, injecting rooms, I haven't got a lot of time. How long have I got, Larissa?
Still 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, I'll rush through and I'll try and get an earlier finish in that case. So, injecting rooms. We've got a couple of injecting rooms in Australia. The one thing that I can say about those injecting rooms is that they are some of the most studied in the world. The coast of Vancouver is the most studied, obviously by partisan researchers, but our injecting rooms also are fairly heavily studied. A lot of money is plowed into getting researchers to look at the data around what they're doing in the injecting room, to the point that one of those studies that we have done on the Sydney facility actually made it into this particular publication here. This is by the Rand Corporation. And it was a review of injecting rooms and of heroin-assisted treatment. But injecting rooms is the important thing that we're considering here. So, when it looked at the studies on injecting rooms, the Rand Corporation said, look, there's a lot of studies out there that aren't proper science. It's not controlled science, it's not rigorous science. You know, there are loose studies out there, and that is what is mainly being used to sell injecting rooms to people around the world as a viable intervention. And they said there are only two studies that actually show the success of the injecting rooms. Only two that have rigorous science. One of those is in Lancet. It was in Lancet in 2011, and it was looking at inside the Vancouver injecting room and how many lives it was able to save in the area around it. We'll get to that study in a second. The other was the Sydney injecting rooms, our first injecting room in Australia. So let's have a look at that study. Given that Rand Corporation got behind the injecting rooms and said, yeah, we found success in Lancet and in the Sydney injecting room, and therefore the USA should be opening up injecting rooms everywhere across the USA. Remember, these are the only scientific studies, but here's the one that comes from Vancouver that was in Lancet. They claimed that there was a 9% decrease in overdose deaths in Vancouver once the injecting room opened. And the interesting thing about that is that I had probably late 2010 been doing a little bit of research on injecting rooms, and I had discovered the actual stats from the BC coroner, British Columbia coroner. And that's the stats as you see them there. And when you look at those stats in a year-by-year breakdown, there was no reduction in Vancouver. In actual fact, there were increases in deaths, in overdose deaths in Vancouver, and it's just a shame they're so small. But that is a graph of those actual numbers there, okay? And this blue line here is Vancouver. That's for the whole of BC. I've got those stats elsewhere. And this is for the area immediately around the injecting room called the downtown east side. So when you look at where the injecting room opened, it was in 2003. 2002, there was actually less deaths than in 2003. The line doesn't look quite, it almost looks flat, doesn't it? But here you see it going up in the years after, and it is actually higher at this point than it was back then. The Lancet study finished in 2005. They looked at data through to 2005, and they said, oh, there was a 9% decrease. Now, how did they come up with that? How did they get this false finding? Well, what they did was they aggregated all of the deaths in this side of the line here at the commencement, and they aggregated the deaths up until 2005 here, and sure enough, there was a 9% decrease. What they did to trick the reader of Lancet was they didn't break it out by year, okay, as these stats are. When you break it out by year, it's actually increasing. When you aggregate them, it looks like a decrease. Now this is how they fool you with science. And obviously the Rand Corporation was very impressed with this study and said, oh, wonderfully, rigorously scientific, and it shows the success of injecting rooms. What they didn't do was check out Lancet, because we put a letter in Lancet in 2012 calling out this study and showing exactly why it was false. And of course they gave immediate reply to the authors of the particular research that we were challenging. And those authors had to tell a few porkies to be able to convince people in that letter there were things which are totally untrue, which are in there. Why could they get away with that? Because they actually shared, the same researchers of this study, shared a position on the science board of a Canadian drug legalisation organisation, along with the editor of Lancet. Editor of Lancet was on the science board of a drug legalisation organisation. We can prove that. We can go back to the website, go back in the Wayback Machine and show them all on the one page. All right, so there is corruption there at Lancet. Now just some other very quick things, so 2 more slides. Here's the injecting room in Melbourne, just to show you how they try to get away with something which is totally false. They had within their report, they did an evaluation. This was an injecting room that opened in 2018, and in 2020 they did an evaluation. That's when they released it on the first 18 months of operation of this injecting room. Their claim is that it had saved 21 to 27 lives. Didn't tell you how they worked that out at all, but they just made the claim. That's what the politicians read in the executive summary. When you go to the data, here is the actual data that they had for the first 18 months. And so you've got the number of deaths that were in the area, that's 1 kilometre around the injecting room in Melbourne. And here's the 18 months after. There's the deaths. It actually was an increase. 1 extra death in those 2 18-month periods. When you go to the local government area that it's in, again, it's an increase in deaths. If you go a little bit broader than that, it's an increase of even more deaths. All right, so their data said there were more deaths, and yet they still had the hide to come up and tell us that this had been a success that had saved 21 to 27 lives. Again, no maths, but they just said it, and that's what the politicians read. So you can see what harm reduction is doing within Australia. And just as the last slide, this is the study that so impressed the RAND Corporation. It was scientific, it was rigorous, they said, and you know, they were highly impressed and said this shows the success. This was about reductions in ambulance call-outs in the Sydney injecting room. And it was published around 2008, 2009, somewhere back there, and put in a medical journal in 2010. And interesting with this one is that we actually find when we go into the data that during the day they showed that there was a decrease of ambulance call-outs. Now, it's a little hard to describe this because what was happening at this time that they were looking at ambulance call-outs is we had a heroin drought. And so overdoses and ambulance call-outs dropped dramatically right across the whole of New South Wales. So the whole of New South Wales, because of the heroin drought, had a drop of 61% in ambulance call-outs for overdose. But in the King's Cross area, they had 80%. They did better than the rest of New South Wales. So that's good. And this was the headline. The injecting room stopped all of these ambulance call-outs which were better than the rest of New South Wales. Of course, the media just said, oh, we had an 80% drop in ambulance call-outs, forgetting to say that the rest of New South Wales had also had a 61% drop because of the heroin drought. Okay? So a few little mysteries by the media as well. However, when you go to what happened at night when the injecting room was closed, you actually find that the decreases were actually greater at night than they were during the day. So how could that be? If the injecting room was creating less ambulance call-outs, you know, because the injecting room, it was open and people were going there and overdoses were happening there, not out on the streets, ambulance call. Why would it be that at night the decreases were superior? And again, that isn't what this study drew attention to. The data is there, but they don't make anything of the data, okay? So when it comes to harm reduction, my view has been, and that document that I showed you earlier, which is 63 pages long, it goes across every area of harm reduction. You want to look at methadone programs, the best review in the world, Cochrane collaboration, the gold standard review of reviews, found that it made no difference whatsoever. Methadone programs when it came to criminality, reductions in criminality, or reductions in overdoses. So what else is methadone for? But it didn't make a difference at all. It was not superior to having no treatment at all. And you go across all the harm reduction interventions, needle exchange, exactly the same. They tell you that these are a wonderful success, but when you go to the science, you find that they are not. And that's the message I want to get across to everybody. We need to be confronting these people when they are telling you mistruths about harm reductions. You've seen the picture of Australia. You saw our deaths going up. Why do injecting rooms increase deaths? Well, they might stop an overdose by, offering a bit of naloxone when somebody overdoses in the injecting room, but they prolong heroin using careers. The longer you use heroin, the more likely you are to die. And so you can go through all of these interventions and you can show a definite mechanism which is increasing deaths, and that is why we have had all of those deaths within Australia. That's where I'll leave it.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting, let's say, seeing all these numbers and how they use it. I found it mind-blowing to grasp my head around it. Okay, our next speaker, Dr. John Redmond. Yes, there he is. He was here before, the Executive Director of CATFI, and I can better let him introduce himself, actually extend on what he's already told us this morning, pick up where he left off, because I know he's a guy who really wants to use his time. So here he is, John Redmond.
Okay. Well, I see that I'm already half an hour behind. But I talked to Gary and he said it's okay, I have 3 more hours, so if you guys just strap in, we'll all agree to that. We're good? Right?
No worries.
No worries. Okay, so I'm going to just time myself here because I know how I can get, right?
You don't trust them. We have red flags.
Yeah, we have red flags.
Oh, I know all about the red flags. All right, so in dealing with drug policy, we have to realize that most of the world doesn't know who the heck George Soros is. And a lot of people don't know what harm reduction is. They don't know about marijuana. So it really gets to boiling it down and being able to talk to people on their level. And that's, I think Dave was talking about. You've got to get down and talk to this. Anytime you're looking at trying to bring somebody on board, we have this line of people. And right in the middle, there's half that may agree and half that disagree. But really somewhere in the middle, people aren't really sure one way or the other. So whether it's the United Nations or it's an initiative in California, you're really looking at getting down to that last 5%, bringing people onto your side and being able to talk to them in a way that's digestible to them, that they can understand. So when we talk about it, most people think that marijuana is just not harmful. It's benign. It's a benign drug. Doesn't hurt anybody. If you smoke it, it probably will just make you laugh and you do silly things, and it's a lot safer than alcohol. It isn't addictive at all. So why the big deal? And that's what most of the people think, including when we're at the United Nations. There's a lot of countries that, maybe like at the United States, where they have an entire group at the United States contingency that just deals with substance abuse. But you go to another country, maybe in a developing country, where they're dealing with crime, atomic energy, drug, all kinds of stuff. So we have to water it down and be able to talk succinctly. So one of the big issues that's happening at the United Nations now is the fact that they're talking about medicinal marijuana. And what does that mean? And if we just talk, if we're talking about, I will make these slides available so you don't have to do this at all. But if you wanted to, wait a minute, if you'd like, how's that?
Moving on, Mr. Cadbury.
So I want 3 seconds of my time back. So If we keep talking about marijuana's not medicine, when science says it is, but really it isn't. It is, but it isn't. So when I go out and talk to people, and when I was fighting the legalization of marijuana, there were a number of issues that people thought, these fallacies, these myths. And what I had to do was try to come up with how can I talk to them, and how can I quickly, within 30 seconds, get them to understand what I'm trying to talk about. So let's try, for example, marijuana is not addictive, right? Or marijuana, and if we legalize it, what we can do is keep it out of the hands of youth, because we can control it. We can keep it behind the counter. We can look at IDs. And I'm always thinking, common sense. I mean, come on. You can't believe that. As I was debating this guy, I said, seriously, you can't believe that. You can't be telling these people that. What are the top drugs of abuse in our youth? Let's forget marijuana. What are the top drugs? What's the number one drug of abuse? Alcohol. Number 2? Tobacco. Number 3? Prescription drug abuse. Marijuana was a distant 4th. Yet, all 3 of these are legal. They're all available. And what makes you think that at any given time that you take marijuana and you put it into that now legal category, that you're going to be able to control that? Because we know that age restriction laws don't work. So what makes you think on this earth that you're going to change the universe because of marijuana? Is different. It's not going to happen. So what we have, thankfully what we have is we have a pathway on talking about the science of that we can use, especially at the UN or with any other government. And that is that if you apply the rigors of science, we have no problems with that. You want to take any plant, any synthetic, you want to run it through, you want to do human trials, you want to look at efficacy and safety, then fine. But use that in every policy that you create. So in terms of marijuana is not really medicine. Cannabis is not really medicine. If you look at cannabinoids, then extract them and run them through the rigors of science and be able to extract the harmful. Then maybe you get to a certain point where it could be looked at that way. But you cannot look at, and that's a system we already have. This is a system, looking at it like a commodity, is not. And if you take a look at tobacco, for example, I can't think of a worse invention of humans, worse to the human nature, used to the human existence, than a cigarette. And if we were trying to do that today, the FDA would go, well, don't even come to us with that. So now we take the exact same thing almost, or worse, as Dave pointed out, and try to do the same bad policies that we've done for hundreds of years and do it again. Ridiculous. But if we can explain that to people, that maybe we shouldn't be doing it that same way, maybe we can get there. Now, I already talked to you about the United Nations and the World Health Organization, the commission, the committee that is supposed to support science, and they blew past all of that to try to decriminalize it using known data that was incorrect. I talked to them, even incorrect language that wasn't in the treaty, that was more ethereal, when they had perfectly good words to use, but that were specific, and they didn't even use that. So when we finished, it was 2 years of work, and they passed this one passed, 27 to 25, very close, which really moved it out of one category, but still kept it in the strictest, so that it could be reviewed and researched. But the rest of these things, everything else was defeated. The biggest one was 5.5, the one that we fought, the one that we posed from a scientific level, and there was only 6 countries in the world that were in support of it. 43 against and 4 abstentions. So the point of this is, if you stick to the science, if you stick to the policies that they've already agreed upon, whether it's how science works on any medicine in the world, or by the conventions that they've already agreed upon, and we work on it and we talk to them, we can win. Let's see. Okay, so one of the things that they have said, CBD is a benign drug. It isn't. And Dave talked about all of these different things. In terms of liver toxicity, in GW's, now Jazz Pharma's research, 10% of the patients got liver toxicity. Now, under a scientific clinical setting, if that liver toxicity starts to emerge, because they're looking at the blood levels and the chemistry within the blood, they can correct it. You can't do that if you're just going to a pot shop and claiming that it's medicine. Now you're having problems within the community. Dave already mentioned this. I actually have a slide that goes from the very beginning, from when the marijuana policy project started all the way to now, and I'll release that, but so if anyone wants that. But you know, we were looking at this at marijuana at 16% in around 2018, 2019. And I was wondering, well, that was average, but the high was 27% THC, 27%. And I called up GW and I said, where's this going to go? And they said, you know, starting to manipulate the plant and then you're putting a lot of THC in it, not as much others, it just starts to break down. I don't think there's much more. Then 3 months later, we confiscated a plant that had 32%. I haven't seen much past that, but now it just doesn't matter because the potency, as Dave said, in 2020 we have, just from a joint, we have the THC amount has increased from all the way to 200%. 1 gram of concentrate, 800 milligrams of THC. But now in the oils, and this was from the Western States Marijuana Conference that the HIDAS, High Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas, put on every other year now. 99% they found, 99% THC. So what we're looking at when we look at this is the crack cocaine of marijuana. And so when we want to argue about whether marijuana is a gateway drug, guys, it doesn't matter anymore. Marijuana is the drug. Because back then, back here, there was a question as to whether marijuana was actually addictive. And Dr. Daryl Inaba, that started the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, a good friend of mine, he said, you know what, John, we didn't see that back in the Summer of Love. No one was addicted to marijuana that we saw. We didn't see anybody addicted. Not that they weren't, but we didn't see anybody. But then by 1985, where's that? Right here. When we're getting to 4%, 4 and 5% THC. Now remember, that's average, so it might be the 7 or 8%. All of a sudden, we start seeing people coming in and saying, I'm addicted. It's affecting my life. It's affecting my personal family life. It's affecting my business. I'm in trouble. That was in 85. That was 5% THC, guys. We're at 99. The whole conversation has changed. And then you have the edibles. They're high school kids, or even 5-year-olds. They can't see the difference in that. The Dunedin study, a lot of you are familiar with. I'll just go real quickly. The main issues with that are that it was a longitudinal study. Every baby in the 4th largest city in New Zealand was looked at for 38 years and then again after that. And it wasn't really a study on marijuana use, but they started to see issues with marijuana use. And the biggest issue was, one that stunned us and shocked us all, was the fact of this IQ drop, 8 to 10 points. Now, for us geniuses in the room that have an IQ of what, 150, Dave, clearly. Dave can lose 10 points in his IQ. But Sean, holy cow, you know, he's got to hold on to every one of those.
He said his death.
But, sorry guys. But let's remember that, you know, 100 is in the middle. And so if you lose 10 points, does that mean now that, you know, you got 100 people, you know, that 50% are smarter than you and 50% are not as smart as you, and so you lose 10 points, now it's 60% are smarter than you and only 40%? No, it's a curve, it's a bell curve. When you lose 10 points, it means, and you're in the middle, it means 70% of people are now smarter than you, and only 30% are not. And that means you're out of the running for university. It also means that, so you lose degree attainment, the income age at 25, the average median income goes way down. You can't compete with the rest of the world financially. Relationship dissatisfaction, life dissatisfaction, unemployment goes up, and also dependency on the system. Because you lose those IQ points that I want to hold very near and dear to me, but others don't. So when marijuana became legal in Colorado first, they tried it in California, it didn't work, and that was a real hard. We spent a year trying to stop that. And the funny thing, and I want to let you know, that they were 5 points ahead. Well, actually, they were 10 points ahead. It came out when you don't need you don't need more money than the other side to defeat them, but you need knowledge. You don't need, but what you do need is, you need to be able to discuss it in a way that people can understand it. So for example, there was a bill that came out that was free preschool for everyone. Who could say no to that? And we'll tax the 1% richest people, so it won't affect you, and everybody could get a free preschool. But yet it was defeated. Why? Because the campaign said, okay, let's say that we should have free preschool for everyone. But what they're going to do is they're going to take the money from the taxes and give it to the California school system. And we are, 50th in the nation. We have the worst school district in the nation. We want to give those tax dollars to the same people that screwed up K through 12 and give it to them to screw up preschool. And it was resoundingly defeated. So you got to have that message, and you got to understand how you're going to bring over the people. So, but once Colorado legalized it, the high-intensity drug trafficking area in Colorado and Denver, Rocky Mountain High, Tom Gorman, started to collect data. And he did that for a number of years. And then 3 years later, California legalized. But remember, they didn't implement it until 2013. So then it got legal in California. So I asked Tom, since I was in charge of all 4 HIDAs on drug abuse reduction in California, I asked Tom Gorman to come over and train us, because he had made some mistakes on his collection data and got ripped for it, and he learned. I said, can you come over and teach us? He did. And we started to gather that. And then as other states, things happened, the other HIDAs started to gather. So that's and they all have these reports, and I've just pulled out some to get you guys to kind of understand what's going on. So let's take a look at, that marijuana that's not addictive, right? Except that this is marijuana, 12 to 17, middle school, high school. This is alcohol only. This is cocaine. This is marijuana. You know that drug that's not addictive, they're in treatment for the primary issue of marijuana. Kids. Now it's legal. Now they can get it. Now they can get addicted to it because of the potency of it. So if anybody says it's not addictive, that may have been true during the Cheech and Chong era, but it's not true today, folks. So let's not argue those arguments from 50 years ago. We have a problem in our country with youth marijuana addiction. So this is the highest number of marijuana exposure calls. This is to poison control. We have kids 5 years and under where the explosion of calls to poison control because they're eating the gummy bears off the parents' coffee table. And they don't know the difference between their gummy bears and parents' gummy bears. It's an explosion. Now, just like tobacco increases your heart rate, so does marijuana, so does cannabis. But when a 5-year-old takes a handful of gummy bears, their heart goes crazy. And 2 of them in Colorado died from a heart attack. So anyone says that marijuana is no big deal, it's a benign drug, that's BS. They're lying. Either they don't know or they don't care. And I don't care which. It's no longer true. But let's remember, this doesn't happen overnight. This is commercialization, where you can start having pot shops. Why? Because under the Obama administration, there was this Cole memo that said, well, we're not really sure what we're going to do with marijuana. And it got, well, then why don't we just open pot shops? And within a few years, there were more pot shops in Los Angeles than Starbucks. And we love our Starbucks, but there were more pot shops than Starbucks. Much more important, there were more marijuana shops and pot shops than McDonald's. And we love our McDonald's more than anything, except for marijuana. Explosion. And trying to deal with that. So now we've got these pot shops for medical marijuana, the commodity side, where we're treating marijuana not like a medication run through the FDA, but like a commodity, like pork fat or oranges, like a commodity, like tobacco, like alcohol, completely different. And then it explodes, and then there's full legalization here in California in 2016. And what happens in 1 year with that explosion? Increase the availability and you'll increase its use rates, primarily in youth. Because 40-year-olds don't care. They're just trying to make sure that they pick up dog poop because the wife said get out there and pick up dog poop. But kids and youth, they are looking at that. That's increasing for them. So this is the explosion of that legalization movement. I'm still good. And this is Venice Beach. So now we're completely changing the norm, the look. And of course, this girl here, she's had extensive clinical classes in the university and can explain which purple bud or orange crush is the right bud for whatever ailment you have. Completely outside the law. And so we need to go back and explain the law and what the law is supposed to be. Then, of course, you've got past years' use in our youth. This is there, and as you can see, that the use goes down when the perceived risk goes up. If they think that physically it's going to be a problem, or their parents are going to disapprove, whatever. As the perceived risk goes up, use goes down. As the perceived risk goes down, use rates go up. It's a mirror. And that's what this normalization does to our youth. Along with just what's going on in the neighborhood. So this is the Rocky Mountain Hida. Here's some of the statistics. I won't go over it because I only have 9 minutes left, and she's got a colored sheet of paper and a knife. So past month college age, increased, everything's increasing. We know that. Here's the big deal, the big thing. The Hidas are not for street crime. It's for drug cartels. That's what we work on, drug cartels. Not a single drug cartel we ever saw in the United States, because they get arrested, they're in there for life, unlike Mexico, right? So they stay in Mexico. They have drug trafficking organizations, but not drug cartels. Now all of a sudden you legalize it, and you can't tell whether that marijuana bud is legal or illegal. It's very gray, and drug cartels can now come over because it's very hard to now start to arrest them. So for the first time, I remember there was a guy up in the northern United States. We wanted him he was wanted for drug trafficking. Wouldn't come down to the United States, but he was a hockey fan. So he won tickets to a hockey game in the United States. And he came down and he knew exactly what seat he was in. And he was arrested and did never go back to Canada. So, but now all of a sudden, you got drug cartels, and it's really gray. So our job gets much harder. And then the Denver Post starts touting how great this thing is. The reality was in underserved communities, it was going up worse. The use rates were going up worse in underserved communities, minority communities, than in white communities. Just like, oh yeah, alcohol and tobacco. Because remember, this is drug addiction, just like alcohol. And in minority communities, they don't have the $50,000 to get off of it. So if I can go into a minority community and addict them, I got them for life because they don't have the money to get off. If I can go into a youth, the earlier they get addicted, the more potential I have for getting them there for life. So here's the Denver Post that's touting how great this law is, except that they're also getting advertising money from the drug legalizers, from the pot shops. So they've got incentive to talk about how great it is to keep it going, completely corrupting the journalism business, but then it's not going to get corrupted for a while, right? So in Oregon, they just went stupid further and just legalized all drugs for personal use. That was 4 years ago. So in 2020, they legalized everything, decriminalized for personal use. It got so bad in Oregon that less than 1% could enter treatment that were addicted. Less than 1%. Increased crime, car thefts, counterfeit break-ins, increased crime like crazy. And here's the thing. Here's the rub. Oregon ranked 50th nationally in treatment. 50th. The worst state in the United States for treatment. Because they needed 203 outpatient facilities just to handle the addiction that they didn't have. They needed 283 inpatient facilities that they didn't have. They needed 28 residential detox facilities that they didn't have. Wow. And now you got a public health problem. And with that public health problem, you got a citizenry that went, what are we doing? This is stupid. So now we have this patchwork of laws in the United States. It's illegal federally, and the feds are worried about changing this because of the treaties at the UN. They have to, if we break that treaty, then what other nations can break treaties with us? It is important, folks, which is why working at the CND is important. Because we don't want them to do that, but they changed that at the UN, then the US can change it. And I promise you, once the US changes, the rest of the world follows. What we do there is important. So nationally, because I showed you a couple of states, with not every nation, but not every state, but more than half the states doing something of some sort. Look at just the CBD exposures. This is calls to poison control nationally. Look at it in 2021. And that's the latest I have. They're coming out soon with the next one. I'll get and show it to you. This was a mile from my house. This is CBD. Remember, all of those problems with CBD. 4 minutes. 4 minutes. I got it. I'm going to use it. Use every minute I got. So this is CBD water. You know that healthy thing that's benign, but also it cures everything. And you know, it would have cured Biden's brain if had it. You told me that. So being from America, I'm not political. So, but here it is. That's CBD water. How much CBD's in it? Sorry, not regulated. We don't know. What about the heavy metals? Cadmium, mercury, lead. Don't know. What about the pesticides that was grown? Don't know. We don't know anything about this. But all of you out there know, common sense, folks, common sense. All of you out there know that marijuana is not water soluble. It's fat soluble, right?
Right.
What the hell is CBD doing in this water? Because it can't be sticking to the plastic on the sides. So come on. This is a lie. Right? Common sense. Common sense. And then edible exposures, those kids, mostly under 5. So I leave you with a thought with 3 minutes left. An ancient Greek philosopher was once asked, when will there be justice in Athens? And he said there'll be justice in Athens when those who are not suffering are as outraged as those who are. Thucydides, when are we who are suffering, we're going to be as outraged as those who are. It is incumbent upon us to speak for the children through the Commission on the Rights of the Child, because they never have a vote, rarely have a voice. It is incumbent upon us to speak for them. And that doesn't mean just talking to each other or writing paper. It means getting out there and being active and kicking their ass at the C&D or in our countries or in our states. We have to have a plan, and we have to act upon that plan. So I'm 65 years old, 2 months old. A month and a half, I'll be 66. Next year, full retirement, I can be. So what am I going to do? Am I going to, with my passion, put that in my back pocket and go to my ranch and poke along with cows, or will I do something more and continue? That's up to all of you. If you guys want to do something, I'm with you. If not, if we want to sit around and talk, I'm going to poke cows. So I encourage each and every one of us to come up with a plan, actually do something, and I'll be with you. So if you want to be part of it, talk to Aki. We've worked really hard at this, and I'm with you. If you're ready to sit around and talk, I'm not. So let me know. Any questions for the last minute and 20 seconds?
First of all,
I have 27 seconds left.
Take a bow, John. Take a bow. 27 seconds. Bow.
Take a picture.
Junior flag.
27.